What's up, YouTube? So it's time to assemble this thing. I'm going to try and do a time lapse and talk about a couple of the important steps of putting the crank in the engine, but I want to more along the lines, not talk too much on this video and just make it me assembling the engine. So a couple of quick notes before we get into the time lapse. Bearings are in the saddles. The main studs are installed. I'm going to put some of this Lucas assembly lube on each one of the bearings. The reason for this is this stuff is tacky and it'll stay on the bearings, so on first startup, before you get oil to these bearings, you'll have this here to protect them, and the crankshaft as well. As you can see, it's right there. What else? That's really it as far as installing the crank. I'm going to do that. I'm going to set the crank in, and then I'm going to put the main caps on and torque the main studs down, torque the jack screws down on the sides right here, and then put the side bolts in. It's pretty straightforward. Just attention to detail like always on an engine build. So we'll get started on the time lapse. So the crank's in the engine, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check the crankshaft in play with the dial indicator here. So I got a magnetic base set up, the dial indicator. So to check the crankshaft in play, I'm going to move the crank all the way to the rear, which it is. So I zeroed the dial indicator out on the with the crankshaft to the rear. So then I'll put the screwdriver in the main cap here, and I'll pry the crankshaft forward, and I'll watch and see how much the dial indicator moves. So it's right at 0.005. That is on the lower end of the scale for the crankshaft in play. The standard, according to my book I have over here, is 0.005 to 0.009, so we're within specs on that. So the next step, I'm going to put the crankshafts in the engine. Hey everyone, so I want to apologize. I didn't get a chance to show the proper installation of the pistons into the cylinders. Right as I pulled my phone down to do an actual video on putting the pistons in the cylinders, the phone died, and I kind of ran out of time, and I had to get them put in because I'm kind of on a time crunch with how long it's taken me to get the bearings and everything else in. So I'm gonna talk a little bit real quick with this spare piston I have, and how I set it up before I put the piston in the bore, piston and rod in the bore. So first off, there would be a rod connected to this. It's already oriented in the correct direction. The pistons that are in the block have a dot that faces towards the front of the engine. So orient the piston, and then right here on the total seal directions, you have to place the gaps of the rings in certain directions before you install the piston in the bore. So like right here it says top compression ring gap would be this way if that was the front of the engine, so on and so forth with the second ring, the top oil ring rail and bottom oil ring rail. So get those oriented correctly on the piston, and then what I like to do is I like to put a little bit of oil on the skirt and on the face of the pistons for assembly. So put it on there. I have a tapered piston ring or piston installer. This thing is worth its weight in gold. If anyone's ever used the types that you buy from the parts store that you have to crank down around the piston, they're hard to use. This thing is extremely easy to use. You just place the piston in it like this, you know, go over to your bore, put it down in the bore, and then you literally just push this piston through the tapered installer here, and the pistons pop right into the bore. So this thing, I recommend spending the 50 bucks that it costs. It pays for itself the first time you put the first piston in the block. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, use one of the other piston ring installers, and you'll understand what I mean about this tool. So that's it for I guess I can talk about. So once the piston's in the bore, right, you want to flip the engine over. Flip the engine over. Let's say we're talking about this piston and rod right here. So this rod would be down this way. So you stick your hand through the bore, you push the piston up and guide the rod onto the crankshaft. You have to make sure that the rod is straight this way and that way. Get it on the crank journal, and then take your piston cap, put it on the bolts. They come with a supplied assembly lube from Molnar. Put that on the thread. I'll put that on the thread of the bolt and the bottom of the head right here, and torque them. Now I have this rod bolt stretch gauge here, and the way it works is, the way I use it, I should say, is before I put any kind of torque on the bolts, I measure the length of the bolt and I zero this gauge out. And what I'm looking for is 6 thousandths of stretch. So I figured out last night that roughly 80 pounds of torque on all of these bolts got them to 6 thousandths stretch. So that's what I ended up going to, was 80 foot-pounds. The recommended method is to torque them to 25 foot-pounds and then go an additional angle. But I found it pretty easy to just do a certain torque, like say 50 foot-pounds, check the bolt. It's not stretched enough, go to 60, check it again. And that keeps me from overstretching the bolt. And 80 foot-pounds ended up being the magic number for all of the bolts. So that's that. Next I'm going to put on the, I'll put on this back cover, the oil pump, the oil pump pickup tube, windage tray, oil pan, and that'll be it for the bottom of the engine. So talk to you guys later.